So, welcome back. Now I am joined with my guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm AJ.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being
Nice
here.
to meet you.
It means the world to me, seriously.
Well, thank you for having me. This is an honor to be able to do this. So
You kind of wanted to mostly talk about your experience with DID today.
I feel like that's the thing that I'm most qualified to talk about is my own personal experience. Since I can't address it from a psychological standpoint because I'm not medically licensed, but I am someone who has DID, and I can share how it affected my life and the effects that society's stereotyping and view has on people like us. I'll make it a very personal experience, just to me.
Is there anything like that is really important that you wanted to start with, or should we just talk about how you first got diagnosed?
It's important to understand the origins of DID and how someone develops DID, or how in my case I developed DID, and then we can go on to how it affected my life. I was born in Iași, Romania. I was put in an orphanage at 6 months old, and I stayed in that orphanage from ages 6 months to 2.5. In the 90s, the conditions of these orphanages were just horrendous. They would brutalize these children to the point, literal babies, to the point where these children were left with permanent physical and mental health issues. That is kind of where my psychologist and I can pinpoint the origin of my DID. Is because that brutalization that I was going through was so overwhelming and so traumatic that my brain, in order to protect itself, fragmented aspects of myself to protect me from that trauma. It truly is a lifelong disorder because it started very, very young, but my symptoms didn't present until I was about 5 or 6 years old. I don't remember what happened to me in the orphanage. Well, I didn't remember what happened to me for a very long time, but one of my alters did remember, and she came out and she shared with the psychologist exactly, and she was very clear. Hearing her share what happened, you knew she wasn't lying because it was just so detailed. Like, she remembered exactly everything. Okay. And we'll meet them later. We'll talk about them. I do believe that's where it started. But I don't believe that that's when my DID manifested. However, there was a very popular Christian magazine company that came into the orphanages and took pictures, and I was plastered around the world, my photo in the orphanage. And there's a photo of me, and I can tell by looking at me, it's not me in the photo. It's definitely the protector alter. So she may have come out, during that time. I just don't remember. But just the face expression, it's definitely her. And so it's kind of interesting to see her manifest that early.
Absolutely.
So
I'm sorry. I'm like, what's the word?
I tried to warn you. It's hard stuff to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
With DID, there's a timeline. I can do a quick overview of my presentation of DID throughout my life because I was able to piece it together.
Amazing.
Then I was brought to America, became a U.S. citizen, was adopted by a family from Texas. And the thing was that these parents that were going international to adopt these children from these orphanages were not being told the conditions that these children were coming in. And so a lot of these adoptions failed because the children started developing really, really bad, serious issues like behavioral issues and stuff. And so a lot of these kids got returned, or just the adoptions completely failed. And I was normal from ages 3 until about 5. I was safe. I was happy. I bonded with my parents. I loved my parents. I was just an absolute joy to have around, apparently. But then we moved very, very suddenly to a new place. And I wasn't told about the move. We just moved.
That's hard.
And I think it is. I have a sister who's 10 years older than me, and she's biological. And our upbringings are very, very different. If you compare it, very different. She knew about the move. She was informed about the move. I wasn't. If you kind of look at it parallelically, when a child is taken out of their biological home and put into an orphanage, they're being taken out of a safe place and put into a very unsafe environment. And then when I moved, it was essentially the same thing. I was taken out of a safe environment and put into a new unsafe environment. That trauma, that parallel trauma that mirrored so much of my orphanage experience, was what triggered my DID symptoms to start. People don't really understand when I tell them I haven't been a presence in my own life for my whole childhood. And it's very true. And it's because of dissociation. And so that's when my primary alter was triggered out. And she stayed very present in my life because, contrary to what people believe about primary alters, is that they're there to protect you, protect the core person. And if there's something that is a direct threat to that core person, they're going to come out and protect that core person. And it does feel like they're trying to take over your own body, or they're trying to live your life in your place. And it's actually kind of in a way they are, because I think that you're strong enough to handle that trauma. So they're going to do it for you. Had I had all the information about what DID was back then, it would have made my experience a lot easier. Yeah. I started showing symptoms of DID at 5. I started getting very, very, very vivid night terrors, and I would have seizures. A lot of people don't equate seizures to childhood dissociation, but it can be one of those symptoms. I would hear someone say my name right next to my ear. It would be like as if you came up behind me and said, AJ, right in my ear. But I would turn around and nobody would be there. And this happened quite frequently, to the point where I mentioned it to my dad's wife. I would be like, is there someone saying my name? And I don't see anybody. This is where I talk about Jesus, because I grew up in a Christian home. They told me, sometimes God says the voice of his children, or says the name of his children. But something was very odd about this voice. It was not a gentle, loving, comforting, fatherly voice. It was a very assertive, very aggressive. It wanted me to know that it was there. And it was very scary. It was very, very forceful. And I could hear it as clear as if, like I said, someone's standing next to me. And this would happen quite often, but I think the most prevalent symptom that I can remember is physically feeling someone else in my body with me. I knew that 2 people couldn't share a body, right, unless they're conjoined twins, but I wasn't a conjoined twin. In the church, in the Christian belief, if you are experiencing the feeling of someone else in your body, that is equated to demon possession. And so that's when I started having my parents start saying that maybe this entity is a demon. I think this is a demon. I think that a demon has attached itself to you. And I can't express to you how scary that was as a child, because I'd heard the stories about demon possession. I had heard about people and their experience, and it's very wrong to convince a child that they're demon possessed. All these symptoms were so scary, and these dreams that I was having were repressed trauma from what happened to me in the orphanage, just coming back in dream form. Okay. And they were so vivid. So I was literally being tormented as a child. I mean, what do demons do? They torment people. That's what they do.
Did you ever think that you were possessed? You did.
I did. Because I didn't know any better. I believed what my parents told me.
Exactly.
I went along. I went to church every Sunday. I believed I was demon possessed, because with dissociation, there would be points where I would just stand and just stare out into space, and no one could get through to me. They would have to say my name over and over and over and over and over again, and then I'd finally snap out of it. It would be like if I was like in a trance, and then I'd snap out of it. And so they thought maybe it was just the demon kind of putting me out of commission for a while. I had really thought that this demon had attached itself onto me, and it was just never going to let me go. I lived in fear. I was just so afraid. And I think that's what I want people to know, is the fear that comes with this disorder. I mean, it's hard for me to talk about, like I'm actually tearing up. Because I always heard about this God who had a good plan for me, this God who wanted good things for me. But if he wanted me to just suffer and be attached to this demonic entity, what was the point of living? I grew up in a Christian family that was all about image. It was all about appearance. It was all about looking good to the church. So to have a mentally ill child was not favored. That's the thing with these international adoptions, is when the child started exhibiting behavioral issues or disabilities, from the outside world, they just saw these 2 parents just really struggling to raise these children and love these children and give these children everything. So the problem must be on the child. The issue is the child. The issue has to be on the child. So the failures of these adoptions fell on the child. And I would hear a voice in my head tell me that my family would be happier without me, that I was just a joyless burden. They were suffering because of me. That is what DID in its entirety is.
Yeah.
It's tormenting you. Before awareness and communication with your primary alters. Alters are parts and pieces of you, of the core person. These alters are identities. How my psychologist explained it was, take a ceramic bowl. Imagine like you take a ceramic bowl and you smash it on the ground.
Yeah.
All those parts that are on the ground, they're not separate bowls. They are pieces of that one bowl that was whole at one point. The point of integration therapy is to bring those parts together and make that person whole again. So it's like you're regluing that bowl again. It won't be as strong as it was before, but it's still a bowl. And the thing with alters and identities is they've all got their own different agendas. They've all got their roles that they play. And when you've got one that's very, very dominating, that has its own agenda, that it's going to unilaterally make decisions, that's what makes this disorder so scary. Is because as a child, I had the sensation of physically feeling pushed out of my own body. And I didn't know back then that was dissociation. I thought that was truly demon possession, because these demons push these people out of their bodies and take over. That's the whole point of possession.
And how long did you believe that you were possessed?
From the ages of 6 to well into my teens.
I can't even imagine having that thought for even a second. It's just unbelievable.
It was very hard to live with, because I had never even heard the word dissociative identity disorder. I got multiple diagnoses because DID, as explained by another psychologist, it's a disorder of hiddenness. And I really like how he worded that. It is truly a disorder of hiddenness. So mine was able to mimic all these different diagnoses. So I got diagnosed with ADHD, reactive attachment disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
And these were all disorders that my DID was mimicking.
Right. I'm asking, like, are you diagnosed with any of these still?
I don't consider that. I mean, they are in my medical history, but once I was properly diagnosed, I mean, it explained all the other diagnoses.
So would you say that, like, one alter, for example, has more symptoms of ADHD, but that's actually just that alter, their personality?
Yeah, in my experience, personal experience, and I'm not saying it happens, I've never had an alter that has a mental health disorder that's different from mine.
Sure. Okay.
I'm not saying that it can happen. It's not like one of my alters has Tourette syndrome and one of them has bipolar and one of them has depressive. That, for me personally, they're all part of my DID. But they do all have different personalities. They do have different voices. And that was another thing that I was noticing when I was a child, is I would write in handwriting that wasn't my own.
Really?
And not remember writing it. And I was also getting excessively physically punished for things that I didn't remember doing. This is why I wanted to do this interview, because this is the DID experience. And reading stories from other people who have DID, genuine DID, my story is not so far off from their own experience. The stories of growing up in Christian homes are not ones that I hear very often. It's usually of people who have the Christian home ones that I hear of are being told by family members who've lost that family member who had DID. Well, I mean, it makes sense if you get convinced you're possessed your whole life. I mean, you see, what's the point of living? They believe in Jesus. They've accepted him as their savior, so they're going to go to heaven, and that demon's not going to be with them, and they're going to be made whole, and they're going to be free, and their suffering will end. There's no pain or sorrow in heaven. It sounds like a great deal. That's what I wanted. I wanted relief. I wanted joy. Michelle, there was no joy in my childhood. There was no peace. There was no happiness. There was no contentment. There was fear and sadness and brokenness and destruction. And all of that was because I joined the family. I saw that and I internalized that very deeply.
Absolutely.
Full compensation of my own voice. So it wasn't like really evil voices telling me to do stuff, to hurt myself. It sounded like multiple conversations of me having them with myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I remember hearing was, because back then I did identify as female, was, does she know about us? And that's quite scary to hear as a child. Voices hearing, does she know we're there? Dissociative identity disorder is a clinical diagnosis defined by the American Psychiatric Association and includes the following symptoms: The existence of two or more identities or personality states. The distinct identities are accompanied by changes in behavior, memory, and thinking. The signs may be observed by others or reported by the individual. Ongoing gaps in memory about everyday events, personal information, and or past traumatic events. These symptoms cause significant distress or problems in social, occupational, or other areas of functioning. The origins of these symptoms is most commonly found in trauma and or abuse experienced in childhood. These identities function to help an individual cope with events by separating aspects of self, such as a more aggressive, assertive identity who functions as a protector, or a more childlike identity who can present when things feel safer. And I read that second part because from the ages of 2.5 when I was adopted to 3 when we lived in the old safe house, I don't have a child, a little alter. She's actually a teenager. She is the one that does remember that safe house. She called it the soft house. I think that's when she came out the most, is when I felt safe. Because she remembers holidays in that house. She remembers bonding with my dad's wife. You know, she just remembers having a nurturing and loving mother. She remembers it all. You know, I can't remember a nurturing, loving relationship with my mom, but she does. And so that's why I read that second part, because I do believe that's when she came out and she does remember. But we're getting to when the assertive one came out, and she really just took over everything about my life. I believe she was the one that lived my entire childhood, because I am missing from my memory from ages 2.5. Well, I'm missing from 0 to well into my teens. That's how much of my life I'm missing from my memory.
Do you think that somebody remembers that?
They do. During my sessions with my psychologist, they came out individually and put the pieces of my life together. Because those memories are not my memories, it's their memories. I think what people should realize with the treatment of DID is not only to heal the core person, but it's to heal the alters as well. So once they find healing, then they can feel they are ready to integrate with the whole person and become one person. There was a book that I read about a woman who had DID, and in the book it explained that even though the trauma that caused the alters and identities are long gone, they are still living that memory over and over and over again, and they're staying in that memory until you confront it and heal from it and free them from that memory. One memory I remember very distinctly is hearing this wailing in my head. Not a demonic wail, not a banshee wail. It was the wail of someone in suffering, deep, deep suffering. Just crying out to be freed from the bonds of whatever is holding it. I don't do the whole inner world thing, but I do picture it like walking through a foggy forest and hearing the disembodied wail. You know,
is it heartbreaking to hear that?
It was. It was scary because I could hear it so clearly, like I can hear you through my earbuds.
Oh my God.
And I thought it was like the demon, you know, trying to communicate with me because I, you know, it's
No.
So finally in my teens, we'll move past my childhood because that's enough of my childhood. Because I did experience a lot of trauma in childhood. I experienced a lot of bullying. And the more trauma a child takes on with DID, I believe the more powerful the primary protector becomes. Because she really did rise to an abnormally large amount of power. She was taking the impact of all that power. And she fought and fought with my mother because she absolutely saw my mother as a threat. Because during the move process, my mother left me with this woman that I didn't know to babysit me. And that's very traumatic for a child who's already been abandoned quite a few times already. When she did that, my primary saw her as a very real threat and saw that as a willingness to put me in danger. And so the relationship became very adversarial. And she severed that bond between adopted mother and child to protect me. But it brought a lot of chaos and misery in both of our lives. It was very difficult to raise me, and I understand that because I wasn't normal. There was nothing about me normal. She was hoping that if she loved me enough, then everything would be okay. And obviously with DID, one thing that's important to note is by the time I was adopted, I had already been without a mother for nearly 2.5 years. So in my primary protector's mind, she didn't need a mom. She had been the one to protect me so far. She didn't need this nurturing parental guidance. You know, she was going to do it on her own. So fast forward to when I'm in high school. I had tried to attempt twice after that, when I was 8, and then when I was 13. And when I was 13, that's when my mother completely withdrew from me emotionally and essentially just stopped being my mom. She just couldn't handle me anymore, or the primary anymore. It had worn her down so much, and to protect herself, she just stopped being my mom. That's how I saw it.
Was that hard for you, or you have no recollection?
Absolutely. The younger Alter remembers the day she lost a mom. It really impacted me because I had essentially been abandoned by both moms. It was very tough, because I had already heard about all these children from European orphanages getting sent back. I would constantly hear, I wish I never adopted you. My life would have been easier without you.
That's horrifying.
So I internalized those. That tape would constantly play in my head. They're happier without you. They're better without you. You caused them pain and suffering. Look how much you're a burden to everybody. I became a teenager, and I finally decided to talk to the demon in my head. At this point, I stopped believing that I was possessed, but I still believed that there was a demonic entity that attached to me, because I knew I had accepted Jesus as my savior. And from my understanding, a demon can't possess or inhabit the body of someone who's a believer. Yet somehow this demon was able to get around that. So I was sitting on my bedroom floor, and I just kind of called out into the void, and I said, "Who are you? What is your name?" And this is probably one of the most pivotal moments of my disorder that I do remember, because that very scary, assertive, menacing voice responded almost instantly. And she said, "My name is Rigora Mortis." And with a name like that, I was just like, this is a demon. Because her death heavily implies death, as rigor mortis is something that happens after the body, after post-mortem. To hear that your demon has a name and it's implied with death, and demons are death and destruction, it was more proof in my mind that I was possessed. Why are you trying to take over my body? Why are you trying to live as me? And she replied, because I have no need for you. And that was very, very scary. And her voice wasn't the friendly voice that I have. Her voice was very assertive. She was going to let me know, you will not win. This is my body. I am going to take over. I'm going to become you because you're not strong enough to live your life. And she just had this very assertive tone to her voice. And she showed me neither happiness nor sadness. And there was something just very menacing about her, something very cold about her, and very non-relational. From all the readings of demons in the Bible, they are non-relational. You can't form relationships with them. So I was convinced at this point that this was a demon, and I was terrified. I was just terrified. I mean, to hear something say that they have no need for you is very, very scary.
I can't even imagine. It sounds like terror.
And every time I tried to gain control of her, so to speak, I would always hear that voice going, what power do you have over me? Or you have no power over me, or you have no authority over me. It was that this voice was not going to listen to me. This voice was not going to do what I wanted. This voice was going to continue with its agenda. That is when I started going online and looking up what the hell, pun intended, this is. What the hell is going on with me? I got sent away because things got really, really bad. I had a very severe mental breakdown at 18 years old. I got sent away to a ranch in Arkansas, and I spent there for a year or 2 years, more misdiagnoses, more mistreatment, more improper medication. And then I came back, and then that's when I started doing the research, because I felt like this whole time they were only treating the symptoms, but not treating what was going on. That's when I came across what was called multiple personality disorder. And I really did believe that this was what I was dealing with, because it sounded so much like what I was experiencing. But how can you, growing up in a Christian home, tell people, hey, I've got other people in my head that share a body with me? They're going to think you're possessed. That is what Christians deem the biblical representation of multiple personality, this story. Because this man has said we are many, and they equate this to multiplicity. Because you are many, technically. So this is what Christians will always, if you search on TikTok or social media, Christians talking about dissociative identity disorder, they will always read the story about Legion and Jesus. This is their go-to weaponizing of the Bible against people with deity.
Do you think that, The actual person he was communicating with had DID?
No. In fact, some biblical scholars said he had 2,600 demons in him. And in the story, the demons say, we want to go into the pigs. And so there's a herd of pigs, and Jesus casts out the demons, and they go into the pigs, and the pigs run into, I think it's a lake, and they all drown. And the demons, I guess, go back to hell. The Christians, when they talk about in terms of DID, they never read the end of the story. They always stop at, for we are many.
That checks out.
It does, because they can't comprehend that this is a defense mechanism against trauma. This is protecting against trauma.
I wish that there was some kind of merge that there could be between religion and mental health.
I have good news for you. There is a fantastic book that I came across many years later after I was diagnosed called Dissociative Identity Disorder, The Basics of Multiple Personalities from a Christian Perspective by Dr. Linda L. Irons. She did a whole segment in this book that differentiates between demons and alters. And she does it in such a great way. She touches up on how you can cast out demons, but you can't cast out someone out of their own body. And alters are parts of the core person, so they can't be cast out. I didn't know that when I went through my exorcism. So I was now convinced that I might have DID, but I didn't know alters were parts of me. I thought they were separate entities. So I do remember sitting on the ground, and I had read the story of Jesus casting out these demons out of this man, demon or demons out of this man. So I remember sitting on the ground in my bedroom, shaking, crying. I was so done living with being cast out of my own body, pushed out of my own body. Well, at this point, what Rogora was doing is she was systematically phasing me out of my own life over a very serious, a very systematic time and process. It's kind of like the boiling frog theory. I was so determined to live my own life. I wanted to experience my own life. And so I sat on my bedroom floor, and I remember just telling this demon, in the name of Jesus, leave my body. And I would say it over and over and over again. And every time I did, I would always hear Rogora saying, I'm still here. And it was so scary. And I remember telling God, you are the great physician, but you're not willing to heal me. And I was just really, really angry. So then I started self-harming very severely. And I do want to make it clear for people who watch this video is I did have 4 suicide attempts, but all of those attempts were never when I was during a dissociative episode. They were always when I was me, because I didn't want to live like that anymore. It's such a miserable way of living, and I wasn't getting any options, any treatment. No one would help me. No one would believe me. I can remember sitting in a car with a woman I call my second mom, and I told her about this entity trying to push me out of my own body. She looked at me and said, it would be one of the worst days of my life if I woke up and found out you weren't there anymore. And that really was what brought me to reality to really heavily pursue a diagnosis. I needed answers. Rogora was not going to let up until it got to a point between Rogora and I that it was either going to be her or me. And I had no idea how to handle her. I had no power in this situation, so I knew she was going to win eventually. She was just giving me the courtesy of letting me stay in my body. That was her extent of mercy, so to speak. And she was never evil. I mean, I never felt like she was trying to kill me. I never felt like because she was smart enough to know that if I died, she would die too. So that's why after the suicide attempt, she would push me out of my body, I would dissociate, and she would take control. Because she wasn't going to go out that quickly. And so it really became a battle between oneself, had someone explained that Rogora was a part of me, protecting me, that would have been so much easier. Then I could have maybe established, and that's one of the points that this doctor in this book says, is that you can't have a relationship with demons, but you can have a relationship with alters. And if someone had explained Rogora was a part of me, I could have maybe connected with her. But that didn't happen until much, much later. Fast forward many years of being failed by the mental health system, to the point where I was going to free clinics and saying, help me, I have DID. If you don't help me, I'm not going to live. I'm not going to survive this. She's going to take over. I'm not going to be here anymore. Help me, please. And no one would. I would always get, yeah, you might have DID. Oh, it sounds like DID. Oh, DID is not even real. You have very severe depression. Then I got bipolar. And I had just kind of given up on the DID diagnosis. And I had accepted that I had bipolar. So I got diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder in my 30s. The psychologist that I had went to, I actually went in to see him for gender affirming surgery because I had a double mastectomy. I had top surgery.
Okay.
I do truly believe that during the intake paper process, Rigora came out and shared my experience with DID because she knew that it was time that I got answers. I do remember times in my DID journey, voices in my head begging me to get help, begging us to get answers. In fact, it got to one point where my teenage alter came out during a church function and self-harmed right there in the crowd. And there was a member of the staff that just kind of looked over and just watch her self-harm. But she never stepped in. She never intervened. She never even told the pastor about it. And I do believe that was her way of trying to get me help. The teenage alter's name is Luxlyn, Luxlynn, and she's very much lucky. That is her theme song. Because I grew up in a very wealthy I grew up in a wealthy family, what people would consider wealthy.
Sure.
Times I would come out to mental health professionals telling them about the excessive physical punishment I was receiving at home. And I was just told to be grateful that my parents gave me a better life, that they adopted me. And these are mandated reporters. They have to report this kind of stuff. There was one time Luxlyn came out and she told a therapist that I was being hit at home. And the therapist looked right at her and said, "Don't ever lie about that again." That just kind of made her believe that my life meant nothing, that she was nothing, that she was failed by mental health professionals, she was failed by this church. And I had just given up. I mean, I really had just given up hope. And then I do believe Rigora came out and she offhandedly shared this experience. I think she knew that this psychologist, this one who who did the letter for the top surgery, she knew that this guy was going to give me the answers that I needed. You know, I wrote the letter and I got the top surgery, but I continued to work with him after that, and he latched on to the DID thing. In my intake papers, based on what Rigora had written, he was convinced that I was a genuine case of multiplicity. And so he wanted to hear about it. And so I shared with him my experience with DID from pretty much what I told you. And it was like, Michelle, it was like he was sitting there listening to my story and putting the pieces of my life together, right? And then at the end of the session, he holds up this picture and goes, "Okay, here's your life." And it was like, I'll be damned if all the parts did not fit together. And he explained how DID affects a person at each stage of life, like I did in our interview.
Yeah.
Again, I'll be damned if that was not the answer. It fit. And so it's like he took the final puzzle that says, let's just say puzzle piece had dissociative identity disorder written on it, and he put it in the center of my life, and he said, "This is what it is." He said, "You have dissociative identity disorder." He said, "There is enough based on your account. There is nothing else that would convince me that you did not have this and not any other disorder."
How did that make you feel?
A life sentence. I didn't celebrate. There was no celebration. There was no joy in it. I felt like I was going to serve a life sentence. It felt validating. One of the things that really stuck out with me, he told me, he said, "In the intake papers that you wrote, there's a lot of people that come to me that write about DID, but like they know a lot about DID, but you wrote it as someone who lived it." And then he started explaining Rigora to me. And this is the part where I cry. He took an entity that had been so heavily demonized my whole life that I was convinced was a demon, and in turn punished this demon and hated this demon. He took this entity and he humanized her for me. And I asked her, "Well, what is she?" This was all over telehealth. He was actually in Texas and I was in Oregon, so we did virtual. And he looked at me and he said, "She's you." And I'd never heard that. I'd never heard that she was me. And I said, "What does she want? What does she want with me? Why is she tormenting me?" And he said, "She's not. She's protecting you. She never wanted to take over your life. She was doing it because you weren't strong enough to." And then I had to look back and think that she was the one that had to go through all that in the orphanage because I was too weak to. She had to get brutalized in every form by adults who tormented a literal infant, and she remembered every bit of that. And instead of protecting her and making her feel safe, I just added to her trauma by rejecting her. That's what I felt when I got the diagnosis, Michelle. I felt a lot of guilt. And it's like I spent so much of my time hating you. I said, well, why does she tell me that she doesn't have a need for me? And he said, because she's protecting you. And I said, well, how do I talk to her? How do I let her know how sorry I am? Because all those years she was demonized and tried to be cast out. I bet you that hurt her. And it was just such an eye-opening experience to know that this part of me went to bat for me and experienced the worst of my trauma. And I hated her for it. And I was afraid of her. I was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder on August 4th, 2022. Just had my 1-year anniversary. And it was a very rough healing process. Part of that process involved Rigora coming out and sharing what happened to her. And she had managed to obliterate every single relationship in my life so far. One thing that is not often talked about in terms of DID is from a very, very young age, another childhood symptom that I noticed was always feeling like I was being watched, observed. There was always someone aware of what I was doing. And I believe personally, they'll take this as mental health word, but I believe the primary protector alters. What Rigora was doing was observing me so she could perfectly imitate me when she needed to.
Oh. Do you think that she masked
you? She never masked. I relate having DID like being infected with John Carpenter's The Thing, because eventually that thing becomes a perfect imitation of a human being, of the host, even down to a molecular level. But it is not the host. And Rigora was able to perfectly imitate me down to my mannerisms, my voice, my face expression. And so people would never know that they weren't talking to me. Yeah. But they would have a feeling that this was not me. Because one thing that she could never replicate or imitate or get rid of was that very stern coldness in the eyes. And Rigora always had a very cold, to look in her eyes. And she could never get away with, not having that. If you look at all the photos where she's present, you see that coldness in the eyes. And so that's kind of what tipped people off that this might not be AJ, this might be someone else. In fact, I heard multiple times from people in my life going, I felt like I wasn't talking to you, or I felt like there was someone else there. This was the first time that Rigora was going to come out in her true form and talk to someone. This is the first time someone was going to knowingly talk to Rigora. And the thought of that terrified me. Actually, I called the clinic and I went crying because I was just sobbing to the receptionist because I was so afraid that this psychologist was just going to be so intimidated by her, so threatened by her. He's just going to be like, yeah, you're on your own. See ya. I can't help. This one's too powerful. I can't do it. Goodbye. Yeah. Michelle, that man knew how to handle her so well. He showed no fear, but he knew how to talk to her in a way that showed her respect. And the first thing he said was, who am I talking to? And she identified herself as Rigora Mortis. She didn't say AJ. She said Rigora. Wow. And he said, what would you like to tell me? And he talked to her. He had a conversation. She was present the full 45 minutes of that session. And she shared what happened in the orphanage to me. And she shared the anger that she felt that I punished her and how much I hated her. And I was subconsciously present. I had always been aware of Rigora, so the amnesic barriers between us as I got older were not complete. Yeah. So whenever she did manifest, there was still part of me that I was kind of aware of what was going on. As a child, it was completely amnesia. Completely. Like I couldn't remember. The more awareness, the less the amnesic barriers happened. The more and more that by the time Rigora came out in her full form and talked, there was I could hear her. One thing that I had never heard was pain in her voice and hurt. Because she never showed that. Yeah. She never showed pain and hurt. But she expressed very deep hurt over being punished. The thing that she said to me was, I protected her all these years, and she hated me. She's alive because of me. The psychologist looked at me and said, you do a thankless job. And that's what people need to know about DID, is that these alters are not taking, that's what's so exotic about the idea is for people who fake it is they think that they like the idea of becoming someone else, but they're not aware that these alters that come out, they don't come out to make TikTok videos. They don't come out to lip sync. They do a job. They are very important parts of the core person, and they serve very important roles. And sometimes when an alter comes out, their purpose is to keep that core person alive. That's what gets often missed with the DID faking trend. When my interview is done with you, I'm going to still have DID. I may be integrated now because of the work that I did with the psychologist and the healing that my parts and I experienced, but I can't turn it off like I can turn off a camera. There's no telling in the future that a major trauma won't come up and I fragment again and Rigor comes back to the front and protects me. The only difference is now I have the skills and we have communication and the awareness, so it's not so disruptive and disorderly, and it can go smoothly. And because of the work that I did with this psychologist, I was able to bring forward a specific alter at a specific time, but you had to have a very good reason for them to come out. They don't just go, "Hi, my name is so-and-so." This alter introduction thing, they don't do that.
Okay, introduce?
Most of the time, the introductions, like the TikTok alter introductions.
Yeah.
That is something my alters would never do because they're imitating me. Imitation, just like John Carpenter's The Thing, imitation is crucial to the survival of that alien species. Imitation is crucial to the survival of the alter and the core person. They have to imitate. And with primary protectors, they cannot form a relationship with people in the core person's life because that would compromise their role that they're playing. They are very non-relational because they can't form those relationships. So if you really look at it, Rigora had a very lonely job. She wasn't able to make those friends. She couldn't feel that love and connection. That was just something that would compromise her job as a protector. And she told the psychologist it was like she was behind this one-sided mirror where she could see the other alters, but they couldn't see her. But they knew she was there.
That's so lonely.
So imagine that isolation.
That's incredibly lonely.
It is a very lonely role. I mean, it must be tough to be a protector alter. And she didn't choose that role. Trauma chose that role for her. They don't get to pick and choose what role they play.
Exactly.
Over time, all of my alters, I got to meet one that I wasn't aware of. And his name was Alpha, and he's the only male. And he was the secondary protector. And he wasn't as rigid and cold and unforgiving as Rigora was, but he still had a job to play. And he's probably the manifestation of my gender dysphoria because he was stuck in a female body for a long time. So when the top surgery happened, it made him very happy. I don't remember him coming out very often. And then there was the teenager that we talked about, Luxlin, and she was just so fun, and she had like this southern accent to her, and she was just really like outgoing. So, "Hi guys, how you doing?"
Really?
And she's like, "I like sparkles and I like glamour, and I just like having fun because I'm a teenager." There was a part of her that desperately wanted a mother to love her too.
She's her own complex person.
She very much represented the joy in my life. But because I was so heavily bullied as a child for being weird, she developed this inferiority complex.
Yeah.
She had to put on an image. And that image was, I have to wear expensive stuff so I can prove that I'm better than you. She would wear these, we're talking about $600 Louboutin shoes, heels, and very nice designer clothing.
That must have been hard.
Because it was hard on my wallet, yes, because she would buy these things.
Not the biggest problem.
I didn't realize that my insatiable need for the luxuries in life was coming from her, feeling that insecurity. It makes sense. All my behaviors make sense now because it was alters coming out at different times. She was really just like that song Lucky, She was so beautiful and so doing so well in life, but she was very lonely and she was very broken. And so she filled that void with expensive stuff. That's another thing that people don't really talk about in terms of DID is each of these alters, they experience the same trauma that the core person does, but each of them experiences it in a different way. Each of them react to it a different way. Let's take a bullying, for example.
Sure.
I get bullied horrendously as a child, and it happened all during my childhood. For Rigora, that just made her come out and do the protective mode. It didn't hurt her. It didn't make her angry. She just came out and did her job, right? For Alpha, it pissed him off, and he came out and did his job. For Luxlin, it seeded deep seeds of worthlessness. And so she needed to fill that void with expensive stuff. Because if she looked really expensive, And everybody say, look, people in my life, I can afford all these nice stuff. So
Exactly.
who really wins now? The psychologist that I worked to heal all of them. I got an amazing opportunity. I had a very bad experience at church. I was bullied in church too. Failed by that youth leader who saw Lexlin do what she did. There was a new pastor at the church that I grew up in that really, after the cutting incident, I did not want to go to church and I refused to go to church. But
Yeah,
my parents saw
understandable.
it as teenage angst and forced me anyway. I mean, very good reason I didn't want to go. it was Alpha just said no more. We're not going anymore. We're done. But I kept having to go. Agora and Luxland got an amazing opportunity to sit down with the new pastor because he wanted to hear how the church hurt people because he's working on changing that. And they told their story. I never thought that I would get an apology from the church, but this pastor was a real one. And he just said, on behalf of blah, blah, blah church, I want to sincerely apologize to you for what we have put you through.
How did that make you feel?
It was like the final wall that broke down for Lexlin to be able to heal and integrate.
Okay.
She needed to heal from that trauma. Because I was having thoughts in my head of burning the church down. And I knew it wasn't me, but it was coming from Lexlin. And she was living that moment where she's cutting my skin and that person is watching. She was living that moment for years, over and over again. We finally worked with healing. A big part of healing DID, because it's a trauma-based disorder, is the person has to be in a safe environment. And I was living with my parents for a long time because I had no resources to move out. I tried calling CPS. I tried applying for SSI. I tried housing, like Section 8 housing. I tried everything to get out of that house. But finally, I did get my own apartment, and so that's where I'm talking to you now.
Amazing.
I tell you what, Michelle, as soon as I got into a safe place, that healing happened. They all came to me and said, okay, we're ready to integrate. We feel safe enough. And Rebora and I had a very long conversation. And I remember the last thing she said to me before she integrated with me was, you have no need for me now. And remember, the first thing she said to me was, I have no need for you. And so for us to come to that point where she said she felt like you were strong enough, I was strong enough, I was capable enough. She needed to be reassured before she left. That was why she wasn't integrating. She needed to know that her job was done and she could rest. And one thing that happened during that healing process was a Christian told her that God loved her. And I remember asking this pastor, why would he love something like me? And he told Rebora, because he made AJ and he loves every part of his children. And you are a part of AJ. And no one had told her God loved her. So she integrated knowing that there was a God who loved her. And that was so huge. She needed to know that. She needed to know she was a valuable part of me and she could rest. And so she left, and she's been gone for about 3 months. They all integrated, and I found the healing that I needed. They all healed from the individual traumas that caused them. I said, wait a minute, doesn't integration could take like years? And he goes, you busted your ass. He said, you wanted to be healed. He said, healing is getting the parts to work with you, not against you. And he said, and you have a great team there. And he said, I really enjoyed working with all of them. We got to a point where he felt like there was no more to be done. He said, I think you are you again. And so we had our last session about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I asked him, I said, do I still have DID, even though I don't have falters anymore? He said, yes, it's just in remission. He said, because they could come back. So that's kind of my story with DID. That's the stuff you don't hear about DID. That is DID in its entirety.
I feel like I've learned so much just through your story.
The people on TikTok, they're never going to show the nights they're laying in bed being tormented by dreams. They're never going to show the times that their alter is telling them they have no need for that. And with dissociation, my switches were so fast. I could blink and then another one. Because it makes me kind of laugh when they're just sitting there and they stare for long periods of time and then like, hi, I'm so-and-so. The purpose of the alters is to protect that person. So if a trauma happens, there's no time to just sit there and stare at. They've got to get there fast.
Would you describe it as a covert disorder?
Yeah, like I said, I agree with that psychologist 100%, or that mental health specialist that said it's a disorder of hiddenness. Absolutely. And with most of my switches, it could happen in a blink of an eye, and Rebora would be in the front, or Lexlin would be in the front. During the meeting with the pastor, when Rebora's part was done, Lexlin took off Rebora's shoes, and she was Lexlin. It was that quick. They just switched in and out.
Yeah.
They have to get there quick to the front
It's a
because they have
survival
to
mechanism.
When I say I was filled with righteous anger when I heard that, I was filled with righteous anger. Because from what I understand, her claim was this innocent little boy who lost his life. People go, oh, the fake DID trend, this fake disorder trend, it never hurt anybody. A little boy lost his life. Because I'm sure Letitia went online, saw videos about DID from maybe TikTok or social media, and said, oh, let me use this as this. If I get caught, this is what I'm going to say. That's just my personal speculation.
I thought about that.
I think she was influenced by this trend. And movies like Split, who portray us as child killers, DID comes from children being brutal to the point where their brain has to fragment to protect ourselves. We are not for hurting children, because we are brutalized children. We protect children if we can. I personally am not a fan of them, but I don't advocate for hurting them. I just won't be around them.
I can't even imagine how it makes you feel to have someone claim your disorder after doing something like that.
It's a cop-out. It's thinking about only themselves. They're not thinking about how the real people that lose their lives to this disorder, that still are being convinced by the church they're possessed, that are unable to get mental health help. They're not thinking about that. And Letitia's claim was that this little boy did something so threatening to her that this protector alter had to come out and take his life.
I've never heard of a system doing anything similar to that.
I mean, no. Because there's nothing that a child could do that would threaten an adult alter to come out and take its life. Rigora was vicious, and she was vengeful, but she was never violent. In fact, the one time she was violent is when, I told you I was physically punished a lot. The parent went in to slap me across the face, umpteenth time, and Rigora, midair, caught her by the wrist, looked right in her eyes, and said, "That is the last time you'll ever hit." And I was never hit again after that. That is the only time Rigora ever made physical contact with people.
I mean, you could argue that as self-defense.
Right, because they're going to protect the core person. They're not going to take a life. So that case really set the trajectory of how the public viewed people like us. There was real fear, because Split started it. Split really did a disservice to people like us. And I personally believe because of movies like Split and the Letitia Stotch case, that's why society is not willing to give us any resources for support and help and mental. Because if you look online for like schizophrenia or bipolar, there's so many different resources that these people can go to get the help and support. There's groups, there's service dogs, they can do SSI.
Yeah.
There's so much resources that they have at their fingertips. Mental health help ready available to them. You go on a DID and there's
Exactly.
because we're too busy killing people. We don't have time to be in recovery. But we got places to go and people to kill apparently, and that's because of Letitia Stotch and Split. And then we got shows like Moonlight, which I absolutely agree with. That mental health professional tricked people into believing that people with DID have supernatural powers. They don't. Just portray a movie with DID in its real entirety, and then you've got the horror movie in itself.
Right, like you can have a character with DID without having to make them like this supernatural villain.
Or a killer that cannibalizes teenage girls. I think that's what happened in Split. I think he ate 2 of them.
Is that what was happening? I was so confused. Okay, well, if so...
I think so. I think that was the premise.
I'm sorry.
That they went out and hunted for people, for this beast guy to eat. And we all know that Beast was only there for fear factor. But that was just those movies, and Letitia Stotch was kind of the modern day trajectory of CID, and that's how people portray us. And now we got people online faking this disorder, making it look really, really cool, and so many people want to have this disorder. Like, it just, wow, I can be so-and-so whenever I want to, and I don't have to be me. And so they misrepresent this disorder, and it's gotten to a point, because of all this stuff, people like me with the genuine disorder go online, we share our story, and then we get told, I didn't see that on TikTok. That's not how it looks like on TikTok. You don't really have it, because it doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
You don't have any factors. No, because I'm not gonna go out and say, oh, this celebrity is my alter. No, you don't have any victims. No, I'm not going to switch out and Thanos is going to come in and say, hi, my name is Thanos.
It's like that. It takes away the entire reason the disorder is there.
I believe what my psychologist said. They are parts and pieces of the core person. Rigora was not her own separate entity. She was a representation of my determination to survive. Lexlin was not a Britney Spears factive. She liked Britney Spears, but she wasn't a Britney Spears fan. She wasn't lucky. She was the representation of my childhood innocence that got stolen from me. Alpha wasn't, Alpha wasn't based on any character from a television show. He was my masculinity, my gender dysphoria, my sense of not relating to my gender. So all of them played very important pieces of me. They were. And so I think I was just like, that's kind of all I want to say, because the Letitia Stotch case is over. And when I started crying, when that judge sent that woman, I mean, he buried her. And I said, thank God.
Yeah.
Thank God for that judge. I mean, he advocated for people like me. He said, if you really had the ID, you would be appalled by what you did. If we killed someone and we didn't remember it and then we came to, heck yeah, we wouldn't be hiding the body. We would be very, very terrified. That case really impacted Rebora a lot. She went into a deep sense of mourning. MOURNING, mourning. She mourned the loss of that child because this woman said it was a primary protector alter that did this. That's going to change how people see what Rebora does and how important she was. So that case affected every part of me. And Rebora was very, very sad for that child. And very sad because she felt things, she felt loss. And I realized her name is not representation of death, but the loss of innocence, the loss of my childhood, and the loss of the child that I could have been. It's not a name that celebrates death. It's a name of mourning. And she really did mourn. I mean, I guess I want to end with like, this trend is not okay. Because you just heard my story for an hour, and I'm sure you weren't prepared to hear what I had to say.
I could never even fathom. I couldn't even try to think that up. I mean, you're a survivor. You're amazing.
Well, you are amazing for what you do for us, and gives us a platform to share our story. And thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Our stories need to be told. The stories of those who lost their lives. And I find it very offensive when fakers celebrate the ID Awareness Day. It's not your holiday to celebrate. Everything that I just shared with you, it's like these fakers piss on that experience, minimize that experience, disregard that experience because it doesn't fit their narrative of what DID should be.
Yeah.
And that is insulting to not only me, but to people who've lost their lives because of this disorder. And that's what makes it so unacceptable. I mean, we already got Letitia Stotch and Split and Moonlight and whatever other things that they come out with.
Never ending.
The fakers are not needed. I'm a survivor because of God's grace. I mean,
absolutely.
Because God said my work through you is not done. And as tough as the ID was for me, as tough and miserable as it was for me, I would have never known how capable I was and strong I was. I would have never learned the different parts of me and get to know the different parts of me.
Yeah.
And I believe that God's going to use my experience, and I want him to use it for his glory. He has a reason that he didn't let me die. He didn't want me, he created this child to be whole. And trauma shattered that child, and I'm sure that brought him great sadness, but he used those pieces to protect that child. And he loves that child, and he loves those pieces of that child. And that was a God I didn't grow up knowing. I didn't know he loved me. But I'm glad I do. I'm glad I know a God who loves me and a God who loves Rebora.
How has your life changed since integration?
It's actually interesting. One of the symptoms that I had with my DID is my brain never shut off. There was constant communication, constant voices and conversations happening. And that's why I think that's one of the reasons why I got the ADHD diagnosis, is because people with ADHD, some of them describe it as their brain just never shutting off.
Sure.
And in my case with DID, my sleep patterns were also very irregular because different alters would be active at different times.
Yeah.
We called Rebora the Night Stalker because she truly was, she was active at night. That's when she came out and as herself. Once I got the diagnosis and once the psychologist kind of triangulated communication between me and my parts, my brain went silent. They didn't talk anymore, and so I could finally sleep. My brain just kind of shut down. And I would hear conversations every now and then, but it wasn't nearly as much as us. I think I have a lot more peace now. I came to terms with my diagnosis. And of course, Rebora and I established an understanding. We're not besties, but we're not enemies anymore either. The psychologist really did a good thing by humanizing her, and now I believe I understand her. And now I know why the relationship between my mom and I was so adversarial. Why there was never a bond, because she severed all those bonds to protect me. A lot of things now make sense. DID filled in all those blanks. The gender dysphoria kind of makes sense with the male alter, but it wasn't to the point where it was affecting his mental health. He just was kind of bothered by it.
Okay.
And it explains why I could not remember the periods of time after I attempted, or why my attempts were never successful, because I do believe during those attempts, I dissociated and one came forward. My life has changed. I mean, I'm now living on my own. You know, I work full time. I pay my own bills.
Amazing.
I'm now stable enough. I was unable to work for the longest time because of the how disoriented and disruptive DID was. And now I can be a semi-functioning. And for a while, I was functioning multiplicity. In fact, I was okay with being functioning multiplicity. But once I moved out, then that's when they all kind of approached me and said, we're ready to integrate. Our job is done. Peace out. Yeah.
That's incredible.
So yeah, I think Rigora just really wanted rest and peace. She was ready to go. She was just like, that's enough. It's my time to take a nice long vacation. She's gone, but she's not far away. I was going to show you something. I don't know if you can see it. And they got memorialized on my arm to kind of remind me that they may be gone, but they're always watching over me. And they're always going to be there.
That is amazing. I love the roses. It's a good reminder, but you already know that they're already there with you. We already talked about like the stigmas and misconceptions around DID. Are there any that you have faced in your diagnostic process or anything?
Your DID doesn't look like it does on TikTok, so you don't have to.
Yeah, it's like everyone's so quick to fake claim on the internet. It's like you can't even have DID on the internet.
Well, my response is, show me your license number and what state you practice in. I mean, really.
There's doctors getting their license revoked for like showing personal stuff online. It's like you went to school for 8 years to become a TikToker. Or how long? I don't even know.
I'm not even going to go into the outrage I felt when that petition to get that doctor's license removed. I was very outraged by it. We're not going to touch up on it. I'm not going to share. I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want to get you in trouble. I have my own opinions about that video, and I shared that, and Tumblr just obliterated me. So let's not.
Tumblr?
Yeah, because I was on Tumblr, and I kind of did the live coverage on that and the Letitia Sound case. Another stigma that I face is I don't really have DID because I don't consider myself a system. And you notice I haven't said we or us. I'm not a machine. I'm a person
Exactly.
with DID. And I feel like personally to me, saying we or us is leaning a bit too much into the DID identity. And I don't want to do that. It's not my whole personality trait. It's not a personality trait. It's not a quirk. It's not my identity. I'm me, and that's, I leave it at that. I feel like saying system, I prefer to say team, my little team. I mean, DID really to me is kind of like if you've ever seen the movie Pacific Rim, and those two pilots have to pilot the Jaeger together using their mental.
Right.
And one person can't pilot that Jaeger by itself because the mental overload is too much for them. In a sense, me as a core person, I can't function in life without my co-pilots. And we have to be on the same page. Because if you got one Jaeger pilot functioning in one level and then another Jaeger, they did a scene called Chasing the Rabbit and get distracted, it's going to throw off the functioning of the whole machine. So just like with the Jaeger pilots, they have to be calibrated perfectly. Yeah. And that's how I view with DID. Awareness and communication is you're calibrating all of your parts together. So I guess if I were to pick a system name, I would say the Jaeger system.
That might be one of the best analogies I think I've ever heard about DID.
Well, I always pictured it as me stepping into the Jaeger, and then Rigora at the helm, on the side, and then Lexlin and Alpha behind us, and it's a 4-pilot system. And then there's my psychologist out on the outside doing all the controlling and talking to us and calibrating us.
Yeah.
That's how I view it. Because then we can go and face the monsters together as one, and we function as one team. That's not clinical, analysis of DID. That's my my own personal, because I'm obsessed with that movie, so.
Disclaimer. That's fair. I agree with that, though. I appreciate that. Did you prefer to be referred to as singular or plural?
Singular. I like me, because I didn't know I had DID for so many years, so referring me as plural wouldn't make sense. Because, again, disorder of hiddenness. So as far as you're concerned, you are single.
Yeah.
You know, and even after the diagnosis, I didn't want it to be my whole identity. I didn't want to lean too much into it. So I'm single, and then when an alter comes out, they're singular. I'm not a conjoined twin, you know. And even then, they're still separate people. They're two separate people. They're not plural. They're separate people.
I think a lot of DID is dealing with symptoms of PTSD, right?
Yeah, because it can be.
How would you say that trauma influences a person's mental, emotional, and physical well-being?
I said I'm not a psychologist, so I can't say, I can just only do it from a personal perspective, how
Absolutely.
it affected me.
How it affected your experience. Correction.
Let's just say from a very young age, it was very obvious there was something very, very wrong with me. So it affected my behavior. I was always scared. And like I said earlier in our interview, there was no joy. There was no peace. There was no rest. Back to the question that you asked how my life changed. I'm now at rest. I'm now at peace. You know, I have a feeling of completion.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm sharing a body with anybody else anymore. You know, so that's how it affected me. That trauma, I acted out in ways that would imply that I was a very traumatized child. And it was something that was very real for me for quite a while until those night terrors went away. And for a long time, I thought those night terrors were coming from Lagoa, but it actually wasn't. They were just suppressed memories.
We've already talked about your alters, like, different distinct personalities, kind of. Or did you want to elaborate?
Mm-hmm. There was a very aggressive, assertive one. And that was the thing Pastor told me after the fact in his talking with Ragora, is that he said, I never once felt like I was in the presence of a demon. He said, I did not sense a demon. He said, but I did feel like I was speaking to someone who was very, very intelligent. I do believe that alters can have different intelligence levels. It would reflect in my grades when they were doing schooling. Some subjects I would excel in, but I wouldn't even remember taking the test or being tested for it. So I do believe that some of them did, like Ragora was. For the times that I had excellent intelligence, I do believe that was Ragora's doing, for sure. I won a physical fitness award in 6th grade, and Alpha has always been very athletic and sporty, so I do believe that was him doing it. Sometimes I kind of know how to do makeup, and so that was a natural talent of Lexlyn, is she loved to do makeup. She loved beauty and fashion. She was just such a girl, you know, like just a girly girl, you know, and she would always do my makeup. And I remember one time my mother criticized my looks a lot, even to the point where I was told I wasn't naturally beautiful. Lexlyn remembers being told by her that some women are naturally beautiful and you aren't one of them. And that stuck with Lexlyn for years. But I do remember she came out. I don't say fronted, I say come out. I just don't like fronted. It's not something that I don't use TikTok terminology. So sorry about that. I don't even use the term singlet. I find that really, really offensive. You either have the idea or you don't.
I will note that, because I've heard that from multiple systems before.
There's my hot take on it. Take it or leave it.
Right, like if you do believe singlet, that's a different opinion. It's okay.
Lexlyn came out and she told the psychologist, AJ's like super pretty, but she just doesn't know it yet. And that really hit me, you know, because she did think I was beautiful. And I see it now. I see that I've always been.
That's amazing.
Beautiful.
When you have these things instilled in you from childhood, I can't imagine how hard it is to change your mind about it.
Yeah, that's the thing about having alters, is they see you in a completely different way. Ragora always saw me as strong and capable. Wow. I just wasn't the stronger one. She was the strong, but she knew how capable I was. And one of the things that she told me, the reason why she would for a long time thwart every attempt for me, because she did thwart a few attempts for me to get treatment. She intervened and prevented that. And I thought it was because she was just wanting to keep me mentally ill. But I asked her, why? Why did you do that? And she said, because you weren't strong enough to cope with the healing process yet. You weren't strong enough to come to terms with what was really going on. There was that definite protective aspect to her. Alpha's still protective at some point. In fact, I had a very recent suicide threat, but not attempt. And Alpha really stepped up and got into touch with people who needed to be in touch with, and he got people on the phone to talk to me and talk through to me and convince me to hang on and stay present. Unfortunately, it involved two people who are not mental health professionals, so they had to do a job that was a bit out of their league, but they really stepped up to the plate and worked with Alpha. So, alters, they're really there to protect the person. That's what they do. They're not showbiz accessories. They're not influencers. They're not public figures. With real, genuine multiplicity, excuse my language, when the shit hits the fan, they step up because they believe in you.
That's incredible because, like, a lot of the times you'll have these disagreements with your alters that are just, it's incredible. And to see that they still, at the end of the day, care about you.
Well, it's funny because for the longest time, a girl would say, I have no loyalty to anyone. And I think the psychologist made her realize that the reason she does the job that she does is because she was loyal to me. Because she had loyalty to me.
Yeah.
Thanks for your work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a team effort, for real.
Right. But, she was conditioned to do it solo for so many years, so I understand why she acted the way she did.
How can friends and family better support individuals with DID?
To say my family was unsupportive with my diagnosis would be an understatement. There was an absolute refusal to acknowledge that alters were even real because it sounded so close to demon possession. Yeah. I definitely got the I don't want to know about it, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want to know your alters, I don't want to hear about your alters. From someone who was not supported, I would say, when you talk to an alter from someone that's genuine multiplicity, remember that you are talking to a part of them. While they can't form those relationships, so say like a sister is talking to an alter of their sister. While that alter is unable to form that sisterly bond, that the core person still has that bond with that person. So just remember they are parts of that person.
Yeah.
Establish, again, going back to what that Christian book says, is you can't have relationships with demons, but you can have a relationship with alters. Establish that relationship with them in a sense of trust. Because if they trust you, the alter is not going to come out as much. They're not going to have a need to do that.
Yeah. So would you say that anytime an alter came out, it was for a specific reason?
Right. Yeah, because their reason is they're protecting that person from something.
Do you know specific triggers for each alter?
For Rigora, I was in an unsafe home. I was physically punished daily, excessively. So that trigger was the fact that the environment was not safe for me. And that's why she had to be out most of the time. Okay. She had to take that impact of trauma. I don't really know what Lexlin and Alpha's triggers were. Again, DID was so subtle and so sneaky and so, converty that I can't really pinpoint this trauma is when blah, blah, blah. But I do know the suicide attempt was one of the traumas because that sent out an SOS signal, and whoever needed to step up, stepped up. Because there was a time, for the last time, there was a time when Rigora just kind of stepped away and she took a mental break, so to speak, and Alpha was at the helm, and then I had that suicide threat. After 10 years of not being suicidal at all, it just came out of nowhere. And that's another thing that people don't realize with DID is how deadly and unpredictable it can be. You can be doing great, and then a trauma happens, and then you just plummet. And it was Alpha's first time dealing with a suicide situation. And he really, really stepped up and did what he had to do. I mean, he was completely out of his league, because usually Rigora handled that. And she was proud of him. We all were.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I do agree with the psychologist that feeling safe was probably Lexlin's trigger to come out, because she ccame out when I did feel safe, or when I was in safer environments.
Sure.
Or around safe people. There's a lady in my life who is kind of like my second mom, and Lexlin really attached onto her like that, and she was able to. She always wanted a daughter, so she was happy to have Lexlin as the daughter that she never could have. So they were able to have that kind of symbiotic relationship where Lexlin got that nurturing and mothering and love that she desperately needed.
Amazing.
And the woman have a daughter and go shopping with her and put on makeup and do fun stuff with her, So
wow.
That's the thing what people need to realize with alters is they all have different needs from the trauma they experience. Rogora needed to know that she was loved and she was valued. And she needed to know that I was strong enough to stand on my own. Alpha needed to feel comfortable in my physical body, the presence of feminine features. And then Wetson wanted a mom. She desperately wanted a mom. They all have different needs, and thank goodness, they were able to get those. But I just wanted to tell people what my experience was like, and it sounds like it's similar to what other people experience. I think the reason why I did this is because I've never heard someone with DID that came from a religious background ever be interviewed. And it's very important that people be aware of how the church sees people like me, or this false convincing of people like me that they are possessed, and how dangerous it is, and how scary it is, and how untrue it is. So I really, really wanted to get that out there, because this is killing people like me. People are committing suicide because they want to get rid of the demons.
There's just not enough out there about DID in general, I feel, and so I feel like having this out there is just incredibly helpful.
I appreciate that. It's a shame I had to go through it, but if it helps someone, and that's another thing that people need to know about DID is we don't choose to have DID. We don't join a focus group and they go, okay, who wants to try this DID thing out for a while?
Mm-hmm.
It happened to us, and all the chaos and destruction that it causes happens to us. We're as much as a victim of the trauma, and the alters are victims of trauma. Again, not social media influencers, not public figures, not celebrities. They are victims of trauma. Yeah, that's what I want people to know. And it's amazing that I'm able to talk about Rugora in a loving and compassionate way. People thought my mom and I battled. Rugora and I battled for years.
Yeah.
I mean, vicious battles. And now to come to a place where I'm able to understand her and have compassion for her and empathize and then protect her in the way that she protected me. I feel like that's a responsibility that people with DID need to have. Once they get that healing and communication, is to protect those alters. Not exploit them, but protect them the way that they protected that person. And that's why I never made this TikTok. I don't want to make money off this.
Yeah.
I don't want to get to a place where I get enough notoriety where I'm starting to add alters and I'm starting to exaggerate and go over and over and over and over, make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And I do believe personally that's what happened with Billy Milligan. The more alters, the more money. And it just became a bigger and bigger and bigger story. That's just my personal opinion.
Respect.
I see too many influencers with the real disorders and it becomes more exaggerated and more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they lose focus of what they wanted to do originally. And they lose focus of what the real disorder is like.